Okay, are you ready?
Born ready.
Okay, we've got a lot to get through. Here we go.
In the Brazilian rain, the Dutchman has delivered a defining drive. He climbs the hill back to Grand Prix victory. Max Verstappen wins the Sao Paulo Grand Prix in 2024. 17th on the grid to the win, and punching the air with delight is Esteban Ocon, who takes his fourth career podium, and he will be joined by his teammate for his fifth career podium. And for the first time in 11 years, Team Enstone have both cars on the podium.
Hello and welcome to the Undercut Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jesse Billington, and we are back to review the 21st race of the Formula One 2024 season, the Brazilian Grand Prix, the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, to give it its full title. And to do this, I'm joined by Mr. Thiemo Albers-Daly. How are you?
Pretty good, thank you, Mr. Billington. We had a very interesting Brazilian Grand Prix, and if that wasn't your cup of tea, then A, what are you doing here? And B, there was some excellent World Endurance Championship going on over the weekend, some excellent NASCAR all the way through, including a bit of a controversial ending to that. So it was a good weekend on motorsport overall.
It was, I certainly caught a bit of the wreck at points as well. That was a proper, genuine race to the line for the championship for that
Last lap
one.
action, up to
Yeah,
eight
which
hours.
is impressive. And it felt like 8 hours of Formula One on Sunday as well, which it damn near was actually, especially with
Wasn't
rejig
far off.
schedule. No. So we'll dive into it and we'll wind the clock back to, well, I think it would have been about sort of
Friday.
7:15 on Friday when Ayo Komatsu phones up Ollie Bearman and says, um, put your clothes on and get to the circuit. We need you. Because Kevin Magnussen came down with terrible food poisoning and unable to participate in the on and off track activity. So Ollie Bearman was once again wheeled out to super sub for the Dane. And yeah, we thought it was just going to be for the Friday and or possibly even for FP1. We thought it was just going to be for the practice session. Maybe Kevin would make it back for qualifying for the sprint. He didn't, so Ollie qualified for the sprint and then had to do the sprint. Um, Maybe Magnussen was feeling all right to do actual qualifying by the Sunday, but also by then he might have figured it was just going to be a melee of a weekend and figured he might as well sit that one out warm and dry and safe in his hotel room. Um, but
You
anyway, yeah,
kind of wish you could have seen Magnussen in action this weekend, considering what we did get out of it in the end, and you do wonder what sort of shenanigans he would have been able to get up to, regardless of where he started on that grid.
I mean that does pose an interesting question, but at the same time, Ollie Bearman wasn't exactly sort of skimping when it came to giving us stuff to
Oh no,
watch.
no, he did. He had a baptism of fire, which we'll get into. But at the same time, you do wonder, okay, Mag, he does do well in Brazil generally, in some regards. So especially as he appears to be on his way out, this could have been fun, but alas, not for us. Maybe we'll get him for Las Vegas in that chaotic manner.
We'll wait and see. But regardless, Bearman in, Magnussen out, and we sort of rumble on quickly then to the sprint race. Qualifying for the sprint was relatively straightforward. And then,
My favourite part of that being Alex Jakes' comment about Bottas getting into the second part of that session, going, he's lucky to make it to this part of the session.
yes,
Going, we're under no pretenses at this point. We're not even trying to be polite about it. It's just, how the hell did he get there?
yeah, the stake is terrible. Something that does get reinforced actually later on the Sunday. But we qualify for the sprint, and then the sprint happens on Saturday morning. And well, you've got
Mm.
something you'd like to say about this.
First of all, yes, it was the one sprint I've actually watched live, which in hindsight was actually a sensible decision considering how chaotic the rest of the weekend was. To just kind of do 20 minutes, half an hour on a Saturday and that be it. Um, Weirdly, Brazil is the one place where I think the sprint does work. However, it did not work this year for me, which I found intriguing considering that it's been one of the better years of F1 since they've had the sprint format. So I'm not quite sure what happened there. But for me, the whole annoying aspect of it was that bit at the end where this virtual safety car gets brought out at what just, and I don't want to go into this territory, but just seems an awfully convenient time for it to come out and then for it to be taken back in again. And it just smacks awkwardly on timing and discussions happening off track in and amongst drivers and teams and obviously us and everyone else who has an opinion. And Verstappen getting a 5-second penalty and a penalty point on his license for gaining 0.63 of a second advantage on Piastri under the virtual safety car, despite it being proven to have been quite accidental. Essentially then dropping him to P4 and promoting Leclerc to P3. I don't know, just something doesn't sit right on that front. And it was interesting that it was delayed initially for as long as it was. Hulkenberg was visibly out the car and walking around next to the track when it was still just yellow flags, and Piastri was in first and Norris was in second. But once the swap was made, the virtual safety car then comes out, and it's not me suggesting anything, but I just also don't believe in coincidences, and it gets a little bit harder to ignore these sorts of things. And moreover, Verstappen didn't overtake Piastri thanks to this advantage. And therefore, it wasn't a lasting advantage. So why penalise him so harshly? I get that rules are rules, but then we look at some of the penalties that were given out on Sunday post-race for things, and we're actually looking at the circumstances now, and we're not giving we're giving out fines or reprimands instead of what would normally be a penalty or a disqualification. It seems again consistently inconsistent, and again, I'm not the biggest Max Verstappen fan in the world. That's not a secret. But I also just wanted to be done fairly, and it just smacked a little bit of something just doesn't, some hijinks afoot. I don't know.
I agree with you to
and I know how you don't like to do that.
Yeah. There was something that just seemed incredibly fortuitous about it. And even if, to all intents and purposes, Lando Norris's championship is pretty much done at this point, and I will get on to that in a minute. But for McLaren, for Ferrari, for Red Bull, the Constructors' Championship goes on. All three of them still stand in very good stead of actually winning this, and that will mean a huge amount. This will be, for McLaren and Ferrari, their first championship wins as a constructor in ages, nearly a decade and a bit for both of them, really. And for Red Bull, this proves that really Max is the reason why they put their eggs in that basket, because he has proven to be
their Alonso, if you're going to an Aston Martin analogy for it.
Yeah. So there is a lot still at stake, and all of a sudden you've got this very strange throwing of a VSC and the sort of circumstance around it. You're just looking at it going, oh, it seems a bit odd. Yeah, it's
not helped either by the fact that you had the exact same sort of thing in qualifying on Sunday morning. It was, again, it's kind of, you don't want to suggest anything, but you can understand the arguments being made, and it gets difficult to argue against it, especially when later on in the same qualifying session, red flags are brought out a lot quicker and go, so that one is very immediate. Why was that not from the get-go? How were you able to get that right the next 3 times? Were you just rusty the first time? Were you really thinking that Stroll, of all drivers, was going to get that car sorted? It's just...
It raises a lot of questions, and we were not in that steward's office, and Lord knows, or the race director's office. This was nothing to do with
stewards.
I'd like
to be a steward.
I would love to give it a go for
a race director. One of these, at least I'd know who to be annoyed at then specifically.
But with throwing things like red flags, VSC, safety cars, and all that, this is not a stewarding decision. That is to do with driver behavior, racing behavior. This is all to do with race directors and immediate things on that side. So everyone's sort of going, "Oh, this is Johnny Herbert trying to fix it to get a British world champion." It's sort of like, no, it's not. This is to do with race direction, equally communication with.
This is Johnny Herbert getting on the phone to the race director and going, "Sort this for me."
If you want to be an incredible skeptic, and I'm not in this instance going to stop you. I'm not going to encourage you either for the sake of impartiality, but I'm not going to stop you.
We're not the BBC.
We can try to hold ourselves to levels of journalistic intent at least. But everything about that moment just went, you sort of look at it and going, that feels a bit like, let's just let certain cars unlap themselves and see what happens. And you sort of go,
yeah,
I don't think you're allowed to do that, or you've done it, but conveniently it sort of follows all the rules. It just looks a bit haphazard. And yeah, I don't know.
It was a bit like on Sunday when Karun was saying about the situation with Norris, Lawson, Russell, and Sonoda being unprecedented. That I thought, there's the word that's going to potentially get them all out of this and not have to. This is either going to go really extreme in one way or really extreme in the other that normally you wouldn't have because we've used the magic word here to just, well, it is. So therefore,
this
no
has
problem.
never happened before, so we don't know how to punish you. €5,000 fine, I guess, and don't do it again, which is odd. But anyway, the sprint race happened. We got some interesting results from it. McLaren won 2. Piastri gives over his leading spot to Norris after securing an absolutely fantastic pole position. Simply incredible qualifying from Piastri. We cannot overshadow that. His pace was sublime.
And it should be noted as well that Piastri would have won that.
Oh, almost
Norris
certainly
was not good enough to beat him in that sprint. He was on the radio from the get-go trying to be like, Passman, you're in the same car. You're arguably, according to a lot of people, a better driver. Why not just simply, I don't know, go and overtake him?
Yeah. And equally, it just smacks for the fact that Norris isn't going to win this as a sole driver. This is what made so many of certainly Verstappen's 22 and 23 championships more impressive, was the fact that he did this as a sole driver. Like very little.
What makes this year's even more impressive when you think about it as well.
Yeah, is the fact that he has not really had that second driver to sort of tow him out of danger like Norris has had Piastri at points. And certainly we saw that in the sprint was Norris being towed by Piastri away from Verstappen and Leclerc behind. And that played hugely to his advantage. Again, I think Oscar Piastri is going to get a very hearty congratulations from certainly Lando's team and Zach Brown. And
he's also in this position of just going, I've not done nothing wrong here. I've done exactly as you've asked me to.
Exactly.
So you genuinely can't be annoyed at me.
Yeah, Piastri comes out of this with an absolute clean slate, looking like the golden child. And obviously, if there is going to be another season and potentially Piastri is the one that's leading a title fight, he has got all of this.
It's going to be interesting to see that.
Yeah, and he is going to be looking for this to be reciprocated. And with Mark Webber sat behind him, pushing a few buttons, that's going to be a very interesting one indeed. Anyway, sprint out the way. We should have then had qualifying, but it was absolutely heaving it down. We tried to get cars out on track. The safety car went round several times. Course cars went round several times.
I managed to watch a film in the gap between when it was supposed to have started and we got the announcement that it wasn't happening. And I thought, I'm glad I made this choice and just kept pausing every now and again to check it would have an update.
What did you watch?
Like, I can get another 10, 20 minutes. I can't remember now. It was 2 days ago and we had a whole Brazilian Grand Prix between.
It has sort of wiped the memory.
It was decent. Yeah. It was a good film. I just can't remember what it was.
Was it a superhero film, a horror film, a crime film, an action film?
No, documentary. There we go.
Very nice.
I've remembered now.
Very cerebral. But anyway,
it was
postponed until Sunday morning following the wet conditions. There was a very cleverly caught bit by a sound man of Hamilton talking to Stefano Domenicali saying, if you give us better wet tyres with wet blankets, we could have gone out. And I think he's right there. The Pirelli tyres
half in a joking way, half in a I've got you on live TV and I can fuck you over a little bit right now and I'm going to do that because I'm Lewis Hamilton.
He knows his angles, he knows what he's doing, and I appreciate it. But equally, he's right. Like, you look at the conditions that drivers used to race in, and visibility wasn't great, but the cars at least had purchase. You look at what they were doing on wets and inters across this weekend, and they were all over the gaff. But eventually...
And this is something we talk about with young drivers as well. We see the amount of races in Formula 2 and Formula 3 get red flag because the weather, like, they're not going to learn. If you don't let them go out in some of them, like you maybe red flag after a bit, but at least let them get used to the idea of it, Otherwise, we saw what happened with the rookies essentially this weekend across the board. And no wonder, because they've never really had to deal with anything like this. And it's bad enough on a track you do know, never mind one that you have no experience of.
Yeah, and flip side to that argument, Ocon and Gasly, after the race, spoiler alert, they're both on the podium, were joking, saying that they used to race in karts together in all weather conditions, in rain and snow. So they were used to racing in these slippery conditions. So that's possibly where they had this confidence.
I know we're going to talk about that as well later, but it's just, as we're here, it seems relevant as well. It's quite interesting that 2 of the 3 drivers on the podiums were these drivers where they had to scrimp and save pennies to go racing, and a little bit like Button and a bit like Hamilton, they would go and get tyres that had been discarded by other drivers who had a lot more cash available to them to use them as, for though they were brand new, to make them work in all conditions. And that was very evident this weekend. And it was interesting which drivers didn't do well, but didn't have to do that as a result. And it's just an interesting parallel that was pointed out to me. And then I was like, oh, yeah, that's a very valid point. I'm going to bring that up.
Certainly
Because
for
you just
Ocon.
think, oh, yeah, yeah.
But it also makes you
It's
question
just
how
quite
much of a
interesting.
tractor the Mercedes is that Lewis wasn't able to do that. And Lewis is sort of, again, one of those drivers that had
I very much
the
put that down to
hardship
the
of doing
car
that.
on
Yeah,
that one.
it did seem to be an absolute hell of a car. And again, that we will get to. So, no, we had a qualifying session eventually on the Sunday morning. Drivers and teams setting ridiculous o'clock alarms on the Sunday. I did too, out of partially sympathy and partially the fact that I had to go and cover the London to Brighton run. So I got up at
You never
4:45.
mentioned.
I haven't mentioned it yet on this podcast, actually. A bit like you do an IndyCar podcast. You haven't mentioned that for a little while.
Oh, I've
But
not done one in a little while. That's why.
fair. But yeah, so everyone up at 4:45. They had a qualifying session at 7:30 in the morning, which must have been quite brutal and a bit weird.
It's how they used to do it in the old days. We had to qualify for qualifying.
For
Get on with
qualifying,
it.
pre-qualifying, and then qualifying. Yeah. Anyway, insert photograph of Liam Lawson being woken up in a hotel room. There is that iconic photograph of him bleary-eyed, sort of going, have you been on the internet?
Not recently, no.
I'll send it to you. It makes sense. But anyway, so we had qualifying and, well, all hell broke loose. And we ended up with a very interesting grid, starting at the back from the pit lane, Carlos Sainz, who ended up taking additional power unit elements because he binned it in qualifying. And then we have Zhou Guanyu, Nico Hulkenberg, Max Verstappen in P17 with a 5-place grid penalty. Again, additional power unit element here. P16, Franco Colapinto, P15, Ollie Bearman. Notice the two rookies at the back. Fair enough. Lewis Hamilton, P14, Pierre Gasly. Remember him, P13. Sergio Perez, P12. Valtteri Bottas, P11. Ahead of one of the Red Bulls. Yeah. Lance Stroll, P10, Fernando Alonso, P9, Oscar Piastri, P8, Alex Albon doing really well, P7, Charles Leclerc, P6, Liam Lawson in the Red Bull Junior Sister Team, P5, Esteban Ocon in an Alpine, P4, Yuki Tsunoda in the other RB, P3, George Russell, P2, and Lando Norris, P1. And obviously, we have to talk about what those RBs did.
Which I have a question for you, which if you were paying attention, you'll know the answer, and if you didn't, then you won't. When was the last time that Minardi out-qualified Red Bull with both cars? I do have fun with this, but he's not expecting it.
Yeah, because this all happened while I was stood on Brighton seafront doing photographs.
Excuses.
I didn't hear the
ingrained in a
commentary.
brain like yours.
I'm going to go recently. I want to say it was going to be like Gasly and Kvyat qualifying ahead of Max and Albon at some point.
I was more hoping for a year and a race.
2020, I can't give you a race. Am I close?
Wrong. Australia 2016.
Oh, wow. Quite some time ago. 2016. Well, that would have been... Verstappen would have still been in the junior team in 2016. Yeah. He would have still been in Toro Rosso with Sainz. And the
Possibly,
big league would have been...
Yeah, because it would have been just before he made the step up to...
Yeah, Australia would start the season, and he did that in Spain. So it would have been the two Daniels in the top team, wouldn't it? It would have been Kvyat and Ricciardo in the other two. Gee.
I imagine so, yeah.
Wow. So it's been a long time coming since that's happened. But yeah, again, the RB and the Alpine just seemed to really come alive in qualifying. So we ended up with a mixed grid and a few cars to repair. Sainz, yeah. Stroll, yeah. Who else binned it in qualifying? Colapinto, yeah. Albon,
yeah.
Binned it in qualifying. Yeah, binned it so badly that actually they didn't have time to put it all back together. So he was withdrawn from the race, interestingly. And again, we're going back to being potentially a bit skeptical. Williams waited until the final grid had been published to withdraw Alex. which would, of course, mean that Alex's grid spot could not be filled. You couldn't just sort of shuffle up one.
Mm.
So when you look at the drivers that had qualified behind him, you have one of the Alpines, and obviously,
That didn't work.
yeah, but also you've got the Haas's and so think about the other teams that Williams is close to a title, or was at the start of the weekend close to a title fight with, or
I see what you're thinking, but I don't know if that would have, for this race anyway, would have done them much of a favour. So I'm less likely to buy into this one. I see what you're getting at,
before
but it
before all the
just
weather happened in the actual race. If it was going to be a standard Brazilian Grand Prix where overtaking is possible,
there is no such thing.
you want to keep your championship rivals as far back down the grid as possible. You don't want to give them that little one space grid advantage.
No, but I just don't think in this particular instance, and generally because it's Brazil, it would have given them much of an advantage anyway, to be honest.
No, look, all I'm saying is Williams hire me for a strategist. I'm thinking these things. I've got these ideas coming through. I'll read the rule book. I'll follow the rule book.
Williams, leave him for a little bit. He's not quite cooking at full speed yet.
Steak. You it can't go any worse.
Steak. I know this man. He'll be fucking funny.
Give me a job. So anyway, we've got a grid, and
Oh
then
God, you in that green and black.
green really isn't my color. It's not really. Hopefully, it'll look better when it's out.
You look like a cousin of Binotto's, though.
With my glasses, yeah, a little bit. Yeah, we'll see.
You can be his body double.
Yeah, for races where it goes really badly, I'm the sort of the fake Binotto they put out to get stoned by the
I need
crowd.
to check your nickname in the group chat and see if this is a better one. Excellent. That's what I'll do later.
Binotto's body double. That's a good nickname. I'll take that. Where was I going? That was it. Yeah, I wouldn't mind moving to Hinwell, Switzerland. That sounds pretty fun. Or is that where Bottas is from? Finland. Either way.
Doesn't matter.
Besides the point, we start the Grand Prix. Well, actually, most of us start the Grand Prix. Albon withdraws last minute. His grid box is not filled, so Verstappen stays in P17 with his 5-place grid penalty for his new ICE unit. We then get a formation lap. Lance drops it on the formation lap, clatters through a bollard, keeps it out the walls. So amazing skills from the window licker. Then
and kind of gets to a standstill. And
gets to a standstill.
Okay, I'm good for a minute.
Pause, breathe, fresh underpants for Mr. Stroll. Clutch in, engage first gear. And then proceeds to drive straight into a gravel trap and beach the car. 10 out of 10, big brain thinking. What on earth happened there? It is baffling, and you have to feel so sorry for the Aston Martin mechanics that have just worked tirelessly after getting up at 4:30 in the morning to rebuild his entire pissing car. And then he doesn't damage it, just beaches it in gravel. Going, you found the service road around the outside.
You saw the coverage of how frustrated the Williams lot looked, and you think, I bet that's nothing in comparison to, because at least there's something
one of the
worthy
Williams
of
cars
fixing.
got to go racing
you
as
know?
well. At least one of the Williams got to go racing, and Colapinto was doing well. Lance didn't even make it to the start. So anyway, obviously Lance is now stuck in the gravel trap. The start is aborted. Several drivers, though, leave before the lights suggest they can. This was then going to be investigated after the race. We've already mentioned this a little bit. This ended up just being a bit of a slap on that wrist and a €5,000 fine, I think, off the top of my head. Relatively light duty. Mercedes also, as the grid reforms, go to adjust their tyre pressures. This is then also investigated. The conclusion to this comes after the race. Essentially, it looks like because they didn't actually get a chance to change the tyre pressures, again, it's just a procedural thing, slap on the wrist, £5,000 or €5,000 fine. There's no clear advantage. George says they could have done anything. The car would have not gotten any better or worse. It was a bit of a shit tip. So, Lance out of the way, we restart normally, and Lando, as usual, bottles it. George gets through, the RBs and Ocon scrap a little bit. Perez then spins on his lonesome. In the meantime, Verstappen has made up 7 places in about a lap and a bit. Bearman misjudges a braking point, clips the back of Colapinto, but only the Haas spins, just sort of panic brakes, loses it a bit on the wet, round he goes. He's later handed a 10-second penalty for this, which is causing a collision. Yeah, sure, but I don't think it was really a collision. It was just like a little bit of a racing tap. Way too harsh. Colapinto and Lewis have an incredible battle after Mercedes slides wide. Colapinto comes out on top, which must be quite the sensation if you're Franco Colapinto. You've sold out every flight from Buenos Aires to Sao Paulo, so all the Argentines can come and visit you. There are coach trips being loaded on, so the Argentines can come and see you. And here you are battling the adopted home hero at his home hero circuit in the wet, and you're thundering past him on the start-finish line, sort of going, well, this is a bit odd. 8 weeks ago, I wasn't a Formula One driver. Um,
I was Logan Sargent 8 weeks ago.
yeah, I was a completely different man. Sort of like being James Bond. Sort of 4 years ago, you were a completely different guy. 4 years ago, you were Sean Connery. Anyway, Yuki is hanging on to P3 somehow still at this point. Ocon is behind him. Leclerc is behind him, now at the risk of Verstappen hunting them down. It's steady until about lap 23. By now, the Inters are wearing out of tread with darker skies growing. Leclerc boxes for fresh Inters for the incoming shower. Lap 27, Hulkenberg spins going into turn one and beaches himself on a strange little berm, brings out the yellows and then a VSC. Lando and George pit under the VSC. Ocon inherits the lead. Norris gets a run onto the retro poster, passes George just as the safety car is deployed, and the rain falls heavier. At this point, Colapinto spaffs it into the wall under at the SC. His Born Inter's unable to keep up with the water moving and just loses it. But considering more experienced drivers lost it in easier conditions, not really one to complain about. Hulkenberg is black flagged in the period while we're under the red flag for clearing up Colapinto. This is because he was pushed off of the weird little lump he had got stuck on, which is seen as receiving outside help, illegally rejoining the race. Fair enough. Open and closed thing. First black flag since Canada 2007 with Massa and Fisichella, who were done for, was it entering or leaving the pit lane when it was closed in that race?
I'll tell you a fun fact about a black flag, though. As soon as I saw it, because we haven't seen it in so long, I thought, this looks familiar. Why am I getting flashbacks? Well, it's something triggering back in my notes. Oh, yes, I remember when the Formula One video game first came out on the Nintendo Wii, and I was testing out what the qualifications would be to get black flagged. And as it turns out, perhaps unsurprisingly, arriving at full speed the opposite way round the circuit to what you're supposed to does indeed qualify to get yourself black flagged on that particular game. I was like, we've not had it since then. And yeah, I've been more recently black flagged in a virtual world than we've had it in Formula One in reality. That's how long it's been.
Yeah, that's fun. Anyway, we end up with a rolling start post the red flag straight into light drizzle. Ocon gets a good start while Bearman and Zhou find themselves in the grass. Unclear entirely how this happens. It's two relatively separate instances. One we'll simply forgive for Zhou being Zhou. Bearman, I think, just sort of struggling to get to grips with the car in the wet. Norris then goes wide, nearly wipes out George on the return to the track, essentially straightlining the entirety of the Senna S's. Leclerc then runs wide, Piastri gains on him. Bearman again sends it around the outside of Sainz, almost catches the back, but spins, taps the wall, backs it out, and carries on. Sainz then drops it at the exact point where Ollie dropped it a lap or two prior, but his crash is a bit more severe. Brings out the safety car. He extricates himself, parks up, becoming the third driver to crash out twice in one day, along with Colapinto and Stroll. Verstappen gets Ocon at the safety car restart. Norris goes straight on, and an absolute fucking melee in the midfield occurs of just all sorts of drivers all over the gaff. McLaren swap drivers, and it all settles down for a beat. Lawson and Perez are battling away again. Perez then slips wide, and Hamilton sneaks through, and Lawson survives another lap. It's then relatively steady to the end, actually, and Max takes his first win since Spain, and the Alpine boys share their first podium since karting. And then everyone breathes, everyone looks at their watches and go, Jesus, that was nearly 3 hours long.
Yeah, I was curious about the record, and I think that was the 2016 Brazilian Grand Prix that was the longest Brazilian Grand Prix up to that date. And I did think we're gonna get close to it if we're not careful at this rate. But at the same time incredibly well spent. And if you didn't enjoy that race, then I don't know what we have to do to you to get you to enjoy Formula One.
Yeah, I mean, I think the timing of it is weird because, of course, the race hadn't actually started at the formation lap. So the clocks hadn't actually, the sort of race timing didn't start at that moment in time. And obviously the race timing stops under a red flag.
I think it was just it was more just the element of we had qualifying on Sunday morning, and then we had this delay to the start because of Stroll being a moron, and then it just being so stoppy-starty at times, but not in a bad way or going on for too long in the breaks that it just felt like even longer than it was. And you're going, I feel like I've not done much with my day aside from sit and watch this, but I also feel exhausted.
Oh, you felt shattered by the end of it. But still, there is plenty there to pick through. So once again, we'll turn our attention to the review and we'll go, as always, in Teams Championship order, starting with McLaren, Norris P6, Piastri P8. In the sprint, we've already said Piastri played the
Hmm.
perfect team game, which makes sense as Norris is the only driver who mathematically can contest Max for the title. It's unlikely that he'll do it, though, given that he needs Max to finish outside the points or retire for the next few races. In the past 65 races, there's been only three non-point scoring finishes for Max. Two retirements, Australia this year in 2022 and Bahrain 2022, where he classified P19, but obviously with no points. So it's pretty much a dead cert that he will take the title next weekend in Vegas. Norris's inconsistency through the season has ultimately contributed to this, as well as his team's lack of determination from the start, as Martin mentioned last week. Norris struggled in the wet this weekend as well, making it now 6 poles from 7 that he's lost off the start. Piastri had a bit of a quiet one in the main race, not the result either wanted from the weekend, and with the haul of 27 points shadowed by Red Bull's 32, the constructors' fight could go down to the wire in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, I mean it's quite amusing. I have one note on Piastri, which was quite a race, and then for Norris, it's a completely different story. But like you say there, it's gaining the records that you A didn't know existed and B do not want under any circumstances. This is not the way to go about getting into the history books. And just really welcome to the Lando Norris guide on how to lose a Grand Prix and a championship in one easy race. I mean, as I said earlier, he needed Piastri to let him buy in the sprint because he couldn't get past himself, then couldn't lead into T1 again from pole, beaten to it by Russell in that Mercedes, and then finishes down in P6 while his main rival has a 5 place grid penalty, starts 17th, and wins by 19, over 19 seconds, while you yourself cannot get anywhere near both Alpines. Alpines.
Mm.
Fuck me.
Cars that all season long
Um,
we have called boats derogatorily, but we didn't think Brazil was going to happen.
mm,
Perhaps that's
this
why
would
they
be the
don't do it.
perfect time for that Netflix episode with Haas where Gunter's boat gets bigger and bigger. Like this is actually where it'd be appropriate for a change. It makes sense. Um, but yeah, it's just talk about fumbling the ball. I mean, just to touch on Max that you're saying about he could get the title and something. This went from the start of the weekend mathematically and realistically a 3 horse race, one of which having an outside chance but still being there. And you see what happens in the sprint, you see what happens in qualifying, and you go, this is exactly the Grand Prix that Norris needs to capitalize on. He can make a massive dent, and so he doesn't need to rely so much on the next 3 Grand Prix as much to make this happen for himself. And instead, the guy that he thinks he stands a chance of beating, the guy that he, I just like this guy that he just thinks he can walk up to and just beat the guy that Hamilton had to go toe to toe with for an entire season, and he thinks he's now just able to do it himself, comes along and in the space of one weekend goes, I don't think I'll need the last 3 Grand Prix in their entirety. I'll just wrap it up next time instead. I'll just make this look like a video game and just drive past all of them. It's kind of incredible how he did it. And love him or hate him, you can't say that was not a phenomenal drive by Verstappen there. And if you're Lando Norris, you should be studying that. I know it's going to smart on you, but that is how you're going to learn how to get better. Because that is, I've said this before a number of times. That is the massive difference between a champion and someone who thinks they should be a champion. Big, big difference.
I mean, all the way through, Norris skeptics have been sort of picking out the moments where Lando Norris lost this championship. And I think that is an important way to phrase it. And there have been certainly times.
I'm always skeptical of doing that because it's kind of it's measured out over a whole season, but there are definitely points I think once we get to the end of the season where you can say,
Yeah.
yeah, this is it's still doing that in a sense, but it's doing it with the complete picture at least.
Mm.
You're not because you don't know the outcome. It feel like we do know the outcome here at this point. Even if Verstappen DNFs, we can't rely on Norris to capitalize on that because we saw that the essential version of that happening was this weekend and it didn't happen.
Mm.
So
And yeah, I think that when we get to the end of the season and we go, at what point did Norris lose this? There are going to be moments that stand out as the moments where Norris left points on the table. Austria, possibly one of them. Martin
We
has a
thought
great
Austria was the worst of
explanation.
it.
Yeah, Martin has a great explanation of it in our review from Mexico. Go back, listen to that. It is phenomenal. But I think Brazil is also going to be one of those weekends. You look at where, like you said, look at where Verstappen started, look at where Norris started, opposite ends of the grid, and ends up arse about face. That's not what you need when you're trying to fight for that win, and not ideal. Meanwhile, speaking of not ideal, Ferrari still clinging on game
It was
leader's
nice while
second
it
place.
lasted.
Yeah, that's a fair
And I
way
mean,
to view it.
they're still in for the constructors,
Mm,
and does mean that they can go a bit nuts with it. I mean, they didn't stand a chance last year, really, for the drivers' title. But in Vegas in particular, Leclerc and Sainz, they were just on it. And Leclerc with that brilliant last lap, almost last corner overtake on Perez was just so very, very nice. And you think Sainz was already in that mode anyway, but now you kind of like, you've got the ultimate thing of you can go after the constructors, but it's not the worst thing if you don't get it because you weren't expected to be there anyway. So you're
mm.
kind of, it's just an extra middle finger to McLaren and Red Bull if you can take it from them. So really, you can't lose here.
And also, the next race, they're going back to a circuit that they now know they have a bit of data on. I'm not saying that they know it the same way as going to Barcelona or Monza or Bahrain, but at least we've been to this circuit once before. We know how it's going to behave, and we know how these cars are going to behave. So don't rule Ferrari out just yet. But yeah, not really the weekend they wanted here, though. Coming off back-to-back wins, the Scuderia were on a high, but proof they just don't have the setup or operation at the moment to compete in the wet. Charles was able to defend against Max for a bit, and Max praised him for it. Yeah, he said, I knew I had a fight against Charles because he's decent, which is
Yeah, I just love the shade that you're throwing with a comment like that. Like, whoever could you mean?
yeah, what on earth are you on about, Max? Who could you be describing if we were to invert that statement? But yeah, the car's inability to turn on its tires proved to be its downfall. Cold intermediate turn on its tire. It just wasn't able to generate the heat or the traction that it needed to through those inters. And yeah, there was points where you're sort of questioning, did they just put him on some hot inters and hope for the best? I don't know. Sainz ultimately, though, having a shocker of a weekend. He got to the end of October looking like the flavour of the month. And there was talk of if Colapinto went to Red Bull, would Williams be happy to swap the Argentine out if he didn't perform? Now, though, it might not be the same rosy outlook for the Spaniards. And from here, it'll be a team effort to take the constructors, or at the very least, hold on to P2. It's doable. And I'm excited for what they do next. But this was a weekend to learn from for Ferrari, not one to forget. I think there's a lot of learning to be done from it. And again, Leclerc did nicely with the points he brought home, I think.
Yeah, I mean, again, considering the Sainz DNF'd and that just happens sometimes, Leclerc's points, you can't be really too annoyed with it. It's like you say, you're happy to be annoyed with it because you've been doing so well, which you weren't necessarily expecting anyway, but you know what to do within that situation. We talked about this with Mexico with the top three teams in terms of what they all think they're capable of and what they can do in certain situations. So I think they'll be miffed, but not too miffed.
Yeah, and I'll say when it comes to the DS, the sort of did not finishes that we saw, obviously Colapinto and Sainz both suffered from the resurfaced track and touching the painted white lines, which are phenomenally slippery in the wet, and on a circuit and time where
Despite many
visibility,
meaning to not be too slippery.
despite the fact that they are supposed to be anti-slip paint work as well. But the fact is
They were
that
awful slippery.
they are incredibly slippery, and also visibility was abysmal. So you're not going to be able to see a white line through sort of a light grey mist. So when you compare them to some of the other DNFs, all of a sudden Sainz's and Colapintos don't look too terrible compared to, say, Strolls. But anyway, we'll move on from Ferrari to Red Bull, who top and tail the points section pretty much. Verstappen P1, Perez P11.
Yeah, for me, it was one of those Grand Prix where you get this every now and again. I think for not for every driver, I don't think, but definitely for the bigger fish, you'll have certain races stand out when you get to the end of their career, or as you watch it, you know that this will be one when you get there, will be one that is talked about. And this for me was Verstappen's best Grand Prix to date. It was kind of his answer to Hamilton in 21 or Hamilton in 2008 at Silverstone, I think. And these sorts drove Button 2011 in Canada. These sorts of of just incredible Grand Prix. I mean, he's one of 5 people to start from that far down and win in all of history. And it also frustrates me a little bit about him because you know what he's capable of, and you compare Max of this week to Max of last week, and you see what he's capable of. And it's a shame that he then does get himself tangled up sometimes through frustration and reverting back to type. Um, but he really turned it around. He did what he needed to do. It was a championship drive. It was a drive by a champion, and I just also weirdly love that he won by over 19 seconds, despite having not been within 19 seconds of all like the previous race winners of late. It's just a nice little way of doing that. On the other side of the garage, my fun fact, because I don't need to keep going over it, is both Alpine drivers have now both been in the top 5 on the podium more recently than Perez. Do with that what you want.
I mean, I have an also good Perez versus Alpine fact, which is since the summer break, Perez has scored 20 points, the same as Pierre Gasly in that same time period. So,
and does kind of complement what I said in the preview quite nicely about the last time Perez was in the top 5 was when Biden was still the nominee, and I was like, oh, also that's true of Verstappen winning. Verstappen took that personally. I think he listened to the podcast and went, oh no, I can't be having that. I must have a more recent, up to date candidate.
yes, yeah, it's just one of those things really that just constantly staggers you about Perez's drop off in performance. But for me, yeah, Verstappen's best victory in F1. I'm tempted to agree with you on that one. It was simply lovely, and you could hear how much that win meant to Max as well. He had
that
to
was the
work
first time
for it.
where I've heard him say that phrase, and I've gone, you know what, I am with you.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. And you could hear how much it meant to him. Like he had to fight for that one tooth and nail and not fight other drivers for it, just fight the elements, fight the world to try and get that one. And yeah, he earned it. I'm not
It
saying
felt like this
for
was the
him.
perfect way and the perfect condition to take out all of the frustration that he's been having lately. It's just kind of, I will show you what I can do when push comes to shove.
A proper sort of take the car by the scruff of the neck and really absolutely go for it. And yeah, that's what we want
It's
to
why I
see.
compared it to Hamilton in 21. It's kind of like, oh, you want to give me all of these penalties? All right, I'm still going to fucking win.
Yeah, it's very much that sort of push me to my limits and you will see what I'm capable of. And obviously, we've had that sort of sentiment from Norris, and what we saw him capable of was not making it through turn one in the lead still. We do that with Verstappen, and what we see is him come
Different
from,
approaches.
yeah, what we do with him is what we do with Verstappen is we see him go from P17 to the lead, overtaking 7 cars in a lap and a bit in the pissing rain.
Mm-hmm.
Come
I would say
on.
again. It's why I have to compare it again to Hamilton 21. You see how quickly he got past cars at the start of that sprint, and Verstappen just you always suspect that Verstappen was like, how did he do this? Let me have a look. See, then he did a carbon copy. I mean, like you say, he was up into P10 by turn 1 on lap 2, and you go, wow, that's pretty neat.
Um, didn't Vettel do something similar in Brazil as well a couple of years back, where he just had to
Possible.
absolutely blow through the field
I
and
think
sort
it's
of just
when it was 2013. I think when he was tumbling
even
down
one of
the
his
order on the
championship
first lap, and he had
years,
to make his
yeah,
climb his way back up.
he
Yeah.
got spun out and then just fought his way back through. Again, it's one of those drives where you go, that is why they are a world champion. And
And it's the third race in sequence at the same place where you go, oh, they're done for the weekend because they're all the way down there now, and then they go, actually, no.
watch this. Yeah. And Brazil again proving that it's one of those circuits that just there is something about the weekend that's a bit bonkers and a bit special. Meanwhile, Mercedes, Russell P4, Hamilton P10, that car clearly was a very difficult beast this weekend. Even despite the raised ride height for the rain, it was bouncing all over the place and proved to be unreliable when it came to finding purchase at either end. Some corners it was played with understeer, others with oversteer. Very much a case of welcome back, Ferrari F14T. Oh, how we've missed you. Russell, however, seemed happy to fight the demons and Norris, getting an excellent launch and keeping traction through the second phase of acceleration, where that McLaren struggles, and taking the lead going into the center S's. A badly timed pit strategy did see his lead ebb away, but ultimately to come home P4 isn't terrible. In a race where your competitors haven't made a pit stop and you have, that's strange advantage to sort of lose to. But
Which isn't
ultimately,
normally something you have to fight against.
no, no. But ultimately, this was a good weekend for Russell, and I think for Hamilton, I think he's at this point potentially looking forward to just stepping away at the end of the
He's
year.
already been saying that he doesn't care if he finishes ahead or behind Russell. He's just looking forward to Christmas, which kind of says everything. Um, yeah, excellent job by Russell. There's really not too much to say on Mercedes. It was just a horrid weekend overall for Lewis, and Russell did damage limitation brilliantly, considering all of the stuff kind of coming his way. We were not really expecting much from them. That car is, when it's good, it's good. When it's not, it's not.
Mm.
And just unfortunately, you say it's kind of having to somehow fight against a zero stop strategy, which you don't generally have to do. But again, it could be worse. It could be Aston Martin, where, again, as we mentioned, Stroll managed to crash 3 times in one day, twice on a formation lap. And amusingly, the record he couldn't beat was most starts of a Grand Prix by a Canadian, currently held by Jacques Villeneuve. He couldn't even break that because he couldn't make it to the start line, for crying out loud. Um, Alonso, though, I've got to give a word to him whilst we're on Aston Martin because it's not going to take long. Because, okay, yeah, not a great race for him, but even though Ted Kravitz did say that this is probably useless information and underappreciated, I appreciate it because it shows you the kind of driver that Alonso is and why I really want him to be in a competitive car. He spun towards the end of the race, was 20 seconds back from Joe, and still managed to overtake him before the end and get a bit of a gap on him, despite suffering from terrible back pain because he's in his 40s and that track's been resurfaced terribly.
Yeah,
I mean, give the man a car.
yeah. I again, this is one of those times where I'm going to agree with you. It was a truly abysmal car, and I don't know who resurfaced that track. I guess they just sort of had a guy come around with a transit towing like a tarmacking machine. Went, I could do your track for you if you like. I've got some paint and some tarmac, and people, and obviously the guys at the circuit have just gone. Yeah, we need to resurface it, and all they've done is just pour tarmac on the existing circuit, so all the bumps have just gotten bigger by one layer of tarmac. Net result, really, really violent ride for some of the cars. And you could hear Alonso in audible pain after the race and just emotionally drained as well. He did dedicate the race to the mechanics for putting up with such an abysmal weekend and also genuinely quite emotionally to the people of Valencia and in Spain, where they're still suffering the incredible sort of floods and the aftermaths of it. So, yeah, this was a rough weekend for him. And I think Stroll seems pretty checked out of it. There was a weird moment where he completely dissociated in one of the press conferences and was just sat there staring into the middle distance like someone had unplugged him. I think there is something is awry in the middle of that team, and for it to be going this badly for so long, it needs to change. And I'm beginning to think maybe even Adrian Newey can't fix it. I'm I'm intrigued to see how it goes, but there we go. 163 starts and Stroll still hasn't won a race, let alone a championship. Meanwhile, Jacques Villeneuve, he was an IndyCar champion, wasn't he? And then he came to F1 and won a title. And yeah, you just
Yeah, he won a title or in terms of inheriting it because Michael got up to Michael business. But yeah,
yeah, but ultimately it's his name that's on the cup at the end of the day. And yeah, what happens at the
and we
European
wish we
Grand
could
Prix in
scratch it off. Yeah,
1997?
yeah.
What happens at the European Grand Prix in 1997 stays at the European Grand Prix in 1997. Anyway, on a more upbeat
I
note,
just I just find it I just find that amusing because that's twice in less than a week that that's come up, and I've had to just kind of get into an unexpected argument and then get it curtailed immediately about Jacques Villeneuve's championship.
it is an interesting championship to go back. And I'm sure at some point, if we ever run out of content, you and I can sit down and discuss and rewatch the entire 1997 championship and go through it at length. But we have more important things and more upbeat things to go through. And weirdly enough, this is the point in the
I've got a
podcast
segue.
we go to Alpine. What is your segue?
What else happened in 1997 that's relevant to Alpine?
Um, Ocon and Gasly were born.
No, it was the last time two French drivers finished on the podium together. Spain 1997. Olivier Panis and Jean Alesi.
Oh, oh, oh. Oh, that is a good
Segue.
fact. That is a good fact and a good segue. Well done. Um, yeah, if P2 and P3 for Ocon and Gasly still sort of baffles and blows my mind considering how where they've been all season. If Alpine hold on to this newly inherited sixth place from ninth, their climb here is worth $30 million. What an incredibly rewarding race weekend for them. They also haven't done an in race pit stop. Korea 2013 was the last time we saw two drivers from the Enstone team on the podium together. That was Kimi and Roman when it was called Lotus. Ocon has now led more laps of a Grand Prix this year than Perez, 14-1. If you're Perez, that needs to smart.
Again, make of that what you will.
Yeah. Much like I'll say with the RB cars, the Toro Rosso Minardis, it was a car that inspired confidence in the wet and allowed the drivers to push and make the most of it. Ocon's pace at points was genuinely exceptional. He was disappearing a bit from the rest of the field, even with his tyres fading away.
It's a team and two drivers that they had nothing to lose and everything to gain, and it's kind of why we love F1. It's kind of like, well, fuck it, right? Let's just like you said, you've had this kind of a season. What could possibly go wrong? And also, even if it does, we're already having that because that's been this whole year. So why do we not just do a balls to the wall Albon and Australia situation and let's just see if we can make this work for us? And they did, and you kind of have to love that. And the fact that, like you say, potentially a $30 million race also transforms into Gasly's now only 2 points behind Sonoda and Ocon's 1 point behind Stroll in the championship, which is also just four behind Yuki. After one race is insane and kind of shows you the seasons that they've been having in some respects as well. And like, I know that there is a luck element in certain aspects. You've got to capitalize on advantages where you get them, but also, you know, you just need to get into points a couple times and the other drivers that they're near to keep doing what they've been doing. And you're just sitting there looking incredibly pretty and happy with yourself.
Sonoda is in what, P11 on 28 points, Gasly 26, Stroll 24, Ocon 23, and then you've also got that's what you've got in that little puddle. It makes P11 one of the most fought over finishing places in this year's championship, which is strange.
Hulkenberg's so glad he's in P10 and he's not going to be trolled by P11 again.
Yes, yeah. Where is Hulkenberg actually? Yeah, 31 points. He's relatively speaking untouchable. We'll see what happens. But anyway, just a great weekend to be Alpine, and oh man, you can't help but feel happy for them, and I think that is deserved. That is earned, and yeah, we love to see.
You've got to be in the right place at the right time. You've got to do it, and you've got to be willing to risk it. And we saw that a little bit with RB. It didn't work out for them in the way they wanted it to, but you know, one of these teams had to do it, and you're glad that one of them was able to.
It would have been incredibly.
You'd have been happy if it was the Alpine. You'd have been happy if it was the RBs. You'd have been happy if it was the Haas. You know, like there was not a bad version of that, and you're just glad that it wasn't. As much as we enjoy them, it wasn't Mercedes or it wasn't Ferrari or McLaren. It wasn't all of it. Like Max did what he needed to do, but then no one else could do what he did in that way to get to the next best place on the podium.
Yeah, arguably that is the best realistic result we could have seen from that weekend's Grand Prix. It would have been Max and then just one of the other random midfield teams that lucked their way into it. And it would have been nice to see sort of like a Lawson somehow luck his way onto the podium all of a sudden, or a Sonoda finally or a Sonoda finally get a podium in his career or something like that. But seeing the two Alpines do it after the absolutely torrid season they've had, what it's done for the constructors' fight for their championships is sublime. And it fills you with joy. If it doesn't fill you with joy, you do not love this sport. Meanwhile, Haas, K-Mag missing in action for obvious reasons, Hulkenberg disqualified for being given off-track assistance, and Bearman P12.
He was touched inappropriately and he got disqualified.
Yeah, usually it's not the person that gets touched inappropriately that gets disqualified. But anyway, Bearman P12, I think, is the important one. Installed into the car last minute, one practice session to get up to speed, a resurfaced track that he's never raced at before going all out and qualifying into the sprint. All things considered, this was ultimately just going to be a learning weekend for him. And despite an array of spins and excursions through the boggy grass, plus a very harsh penalty for a tap into the back of Colapinto, I'd say P12 isn't the worst result we could have expected from him. Hulkenberg was just unfortunate, and really they should have known that getting a push from stewards or marshals results in a DSQ. Think back to Senna getting a push at Suzuka in 1989. You know that's what happens when you get that outside assistance. I think Haas were maybe just hoping no one noticed in the chaos of it all, and that was fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think agree on Hulk on that one. It was just unfortunate. He didn't seem too annoyed about it. Obviously, you would have preferred to keep going, but it happens. Very rarely, admittedly, but it happens. And I think Bearman is the same thing I've said for Paul Pinto. It was a necessary baptism of fire for the pair of them. So I'm not saying they've had it easy, but they've made it look easy in some respects with how well they've done coming into it. So it was kind of like, okay, you think you're. It's kind of like the lower version of what Norris had to deal with this weekend of, oh, you think you're ready for this? Oh, okay, then Brazil.
Yeah.
And we'll see how you actually get on, and we'll separate at the moment the boys from the men.
Mm.
And it's not saying that they kind of aren't capable. They are, and they will be, and they're still very early on. It's again, it's harsher for Norris because he's been around a lot longer and all the rest of it. But for these two, they needed a race like this, and the sooner they get one like this under their belt, which we both probably thought would have been Baku, if it was ever going to be one. And kind of like, especially for Ben, like, oh, you think this was easy in F2 because you got a double win? Nice try. We're going to go to this, and then he did well. Like, oh, bollocks. Okay, that didn't work. Brazil, do your thing. And they needed to learn this. They needed to have the harshness of the conditions, the penalties, the lack of practice, everything. And didn't work out in some ways, looking at Colapinto, but again, part of that learning curve. Bearman, like you say, P12 after all of that, not bad. And you can't be too disappointed from his perspective. And I think if you're Komatsu, you're reassured that you've got a good pair of hands in that car who's not going to be shitting the bed when the next time we get this condition. We've seen wet race in Australia before. If you have that at the start of the season, you don't want him to that be the first time that he has to deal with those kind of conditions, you know?
Yeah.
And we've got a proper battle now between them, RB, Williams, and Alpine for P6. I mean, there's a smattering of points in there now between the lot of them. And it's nice to have that top three fight. Then you've got P4 all by themselves, you've got P5 all by themselves, and then you've got the rest of them all fighting out, and then you've got Stake. So it's nice that we've got this nice battle going on there. And yeah, I think that's all. It's a bit like Ferrari for me. It wasn't as bad as it looked.
Mm. And there's a good amount of learning that can be done from it. I think that is the ultimate important thing here is Bearman can walk away from that with his head held high. He did really well considering those conditions and can come away having learned an incredible amount, and that's going to be useful for them. And like you said, obviously Aston Martin a bit out of touch in 86 points, but then you've got Alpine 49, Haas 46, and Minardi 44. That little title scrap in the constructors is worth a hell of a lot when it comes to sort of prize money for developing cars and things. And that's going to be an interesting fight as it goes on. And again, if you're Ayo Komatsu, you've got a driver now that's coming into your team more well-rounded than you initially anticipated. This gap between the F2 races that we've seen has filled him with so much incredible experience that you're getting a far better deal than you maybe initially anticipated when you signed that check. And now you've got a driver that's recently been on the podium that's proved they can do interesting things with a bit of a tractor in changing conditions. It's also going to have shored up his confidence in hiring Ocon as well. So Ayo Komatsu is going to come out this weekend with a little bit more of a sort of self-confidence, a bit more oomph to it as well, sort of going, this is possibly going to go okay. So I won't say I don't want him to rest on his laurels, but certainly it's going to go okay. Meanwhile, RB, Minardi, Toro Rosso, Racing Bulls are apparently changing the name to Racing Bulls next season. Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson, P7 and P9.
It's such an awkward one because it could have been better, but it was still pretty good overall. And obviously, it's frustrating when you start so high up and then you finish maybe where you'd expect them to on a good day. And it's this thing of we knew one team from that midfield was going to capitalize, and you thought it would be them because they'd put themselves in that prime position, and it would have been really, really funny to see three of the four Red Bull drivers on the podium, the one to not be Perez. and just to go look at and just to see the close up of his face going, oh shit. But we didn't get that.
But they
I
still
don't think
finished
they can be
ahead of
disappointed
Perez.
either. Oh yeah, well, obviously. But yeah, it's that thing of I can understand the frustration, but again, a little bit like Haas, a little bit like Ferrari. There's still a lot to be happy about and to not be too disappointed with. The thing that amused me the most, though, was Lawson versus Verstappen. In contrast to Lawson versus Perez,
Yeah,
two very different battles going on there in terms of one wasn't a battle and the other one was no, you're not going past without a bit of argy-bargy. And
yeah.
even then,
With Verstappen, he put a little bit of a squeeze on him, I think, until he realised which Red Bull it was that was kind
I'll
of
let you know
past.
I'm there. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's kind of like radio. Which one is? Oh, okay. Sorry.
yeah. It was
It's the
sort of
next.
that
Okay.
just sort of, I'm going to show you that I'm here in the gloom and the spray in case you can't see me, just so you don't
I
accidentally.
won't
Okay,
make it as
good.
easy as other drivers have
Yeah,
made it when they've been in my seat, but I won't be a dick
yeah.
about it either
He,
because
he
I'm not going after your seat.
he plays a sensible game. He knows he wants to make the highlight footage, but then Perez comes along and goes, "Oh, I'm making the highlight footage," and just fights him the entire way down the center S's, and you're sort of going, "Oh, you deranged little Kiwi, I love you. It's beautiful." And yeah,
I need to go and back through my history books and see if there was ever a family feud centuries ago between the Lawsons and the Perez clans, and just see is there something we're missing here? Like, it's just over a seat. This seems harsh.
feels like there's certainly something there. Yuki's tied best finish this season though with Australia and Miami, and Liam just looking really on it as well. Actually, again considering the conditions and things, he can walk away having learned a huge amount. And a surprisingly quiet race for him, though, and as we've already mentioned, making Checo's life hell as usual. The RB has taken what looked like a good step forward this weekend, and it was confidence inspiring for its drivers. So I'd wager it gave them the needed edge, just being able to sort of drive the car and know that it's going to respond in a relatively linear way is just what you need, unlike the Mercedes where you go, if I turn the wheel, is it going to understeer or oversteer? It's doing neither. It's not the RB just seemed to respond to driver inputs. And potentially again, this is where certainly in Liam's case, he has this very fluid input into the steering and this very fluid driving nature, which seems to really lend itself to these conditions, just keeping it moving, keeping the car going in the right direction all came together. And that also meant that his tires were switched on. He had sort of battery left. He had mental capacity left when Perez comes along and he goes, nope. And yeah, just spot on. Williams,
I feel
Albon
like with Williams
DNS.
and Stake, there's really not too much to say because Williams, for me, two very different reasons though. Williams, just a lot of bad luck.
Yeah.
I feel like there's you can't be you're annoyed, but you're not annoyed because they've done something wrong.
Mm.
You know, it's just shit happens, and unfortunately, it's just happening a lot for them.
They
And
gave it a
you
go.
know that there is potential in that car. I mean, you saw from the first practice session, Albon was on it, Colapinto looking strong. There was all these on. It's just it happens sometimes, and it wasn't even that much of a flick with Colapinto when the car did get out from beneath him, and it's like that happened at the best times. I mean, you saw it happen to Sainz essentially. You saw it happen to Alonso, but he was able to keep going. It's just that it's just shit happens. Whereas Stake, on the other hand, you just go, fucking hell, this is the kind of race where you're meant to be able to get points. You've got DNFs to help propel you up closer so that one of you can maybe get a point. And then they can't even do that. And you just, you weep like a little boy.
It's yeah, just a bit mad, really. Three rebuilds in one weekend. Welcome back, Nicholas Latifi / Logan Sargent. Seriously though, Albon's pace in the wet was phenomenal. His qualifying looked sublime, and yeah, Colapinto have been doing all right as well. He looked really on it, and then both oddly caught out by the white line along the top edge of the start finish straight and the concrete just beyond. Again, I don't think this surface had been properly prepared and the white lines had not been clearly done to the appropriate spec because they should not have been so slippery as to throw two cars into the wall like that. Again, if you listen back to BBC's Checkered Flag with friend of the podcast Harry Benjamin on it, the former Renault driver Jolyon Palmer talks about racing in the rain at Brazil, and he says you get onto that start finish straight and you just sort of have to guess how much steering lock to apply through the spray because you have no clue where either the pit wall is or the wall at the top of the circuit is. You just sort of guess, and if it appears in your periphery, you've then got to try and very carefully adjust your steering angle, but not so quickly that you unsettle the car and drop it. And for Colapinto, I think, again, when you're driving on your absolute wits, for what, your sixth Grand Prix ever? What's he done now? Monza, Singapore, Monza, Baku, Singapore, Austin, Mexico. Yeah,
So,
sixth Grand Prix plus a sprint or two. That's a relatively fair way to go out, I'd say. To be running up there, having sort of slapped about Lewis Hamilton in the rain in Brazil, and then accidentally drop it. You know what? Fair dues, man. Um, so yeah, it wasn't a fool's move on either count, and it's very much a race of what could have been for the team, sadly.
yeah, I mean, yeah, not much to add there really. And Stake, there's really nothing for you to add either. I don't think.
Yeah, meanwhile for Stake, it's actually worse for Stake because while they did finish, they scored absolutely nothing for it. Every other team that finished scored a point apart from Haas. Every other team that had both drivers finish scored a point.
So that statistic really started falling apart the moment you started talking there, didn't it?
It did. The more and more I thought about it, I was like, I've figured out a statistic on the fly. And then went, every team that had both drivers finish scored a point.
This is why you should improvise.
Yeah, I should probably just stick to what I've written in the script, which is Bottas 6 seconds off the back of Bearman, taking into account as well Bearman's penalty and the fact that he just at some points couldn't keep that Haas on the track. Zhou then 16 seconds further back still. Truly a painful weekend for them as they had no pace in the race and just floundered. Zhou needed unlapping post red flag. And bear in mind that red flag came before the halfway mark. Genuinely
And Ocon was maybe
abysmal.
leading at that point.
Yeah, Ocon leading. You've been lapped before half time by Ocon. Also, can I just say more F1 races need a little half time so I can go and pee? That's possibly a very personal
No,
complaint, but no, okay. But either
you
way,
pulled it in.
either way, if you're getting to not even half race distance and needing to be unlapped,
It's not great.
no, I don't think we need to say more. So we might as well dive then
Winners and
into
spinners.
winners and spinners. Might as well dive into those. Thiemo, who's your winner?
Max Verstappen, best driver, and went from a three-way title battle to potentially clinching it next time out in Las Vegas after making that race look incredibly easy. Just incredible from him.
Yeah, if you're making it that look easy, I think that is almost certainly a winner. For me, though, Esteban Ocon for just seeming so in control of it at points, and really Alpine as well, just absolutely operating perfectly this weekend. You can't fault them for what they did. They pulled the perfect strategy somewhere out of their arse and made it count where it needed to. And yeah,
And I think I can safely speak on Ellie-May's behalf here by saying that she'll echo Alpine slash Gasly for pretty much the same reasons.
yeah, almost certainly. Flip side of the coin, though, spinners.
McLaren, how to fumble both championships 101.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to be worse if you're Oscar Piastri because you're now realizing that you gave up a sprint win for what? For your teammate to bottle
To be
it off
honest, I
the
don't
line?
think he'll care too much about that because he's Oscar
No.
Piastri, but point made.
Yeah. Meanwhile, my spinner, Perez, I guess, or maybe Aston Martin. Bear in mind that Gasly started behind Perez and finished on the podium in an Alpine.
Yeah, yeah. It's again a former Red Bull driver as well, bear in mind.
Yeah. Just
There's a weird way where you can see him joining Red Bull slash leaving Red Bull has led to this moment. There's a weird domino effect that you will see that leads to that. I've not quite figured out all the steps in between, but it's an amusing one to consider.
it's like the same domino line that can be traced back to Alex Albon having appendicitis.
Yes.
Yeah, that sort of leads all the way through to somehow Liam Lawson being like fifth on the grid at the start of this weekend. Yeah, just truly beautiful stuff. Predictions review. No points at all from anyone. None of us predicted any of what was going to happen.
No, not at all. Go on.
I genuinely got close. Everyone thought I was stupid for predicting Yuki Pole, though.
Well,
and
you
I was
were because you got close, but what strange force are we on? None, because you got it wrong.
I was so close.
That's not the same as getting it right. Oh, it was nearly there. Yeah, still wrong.
It's called
We've had
trying
this
to, it's
conversation
called
earlier
trying
this
to do a
season.
callback. It's called trying to do a callback to the other episode. Leave me alone. Anyway, fantasy F1.
I think if you're trying to do a callback, you fail to do the callback. I think you just do the callback. That's as nearly as bad as being nearly right about a prediction. You either did it or you didn't.
It's not as bad as being
I'm
close this
gonna read
weekend.
the Fantasy F1 review though, because this was some amusing reading. For Brazil alone, Force in the Pit was first 389 points, but look at second place, Mr. Consistency's 194
That's my
points.
girlfriend's
Look
team.
at the
Yeah,
golf.
did not. Yeah,
Is-
big gap
Yeah,
there.
but the golf is ridiculous.
I think everyone
Sophia's
had a
F1
driver
team,
that swung
182
negative.
points. Ricardo was inactive in that team, which at that point I thought this does not bode well for the rest of us.
Oh,
JVK Racing P8, you got minus points from 2 drivers and a team to get that. The greatest of stars was in P19 somehow. On the Kerbs P24, minus 42 points for Hulk seems harsh, but still could be worse. Just a compare Carlos, P35 with 6 points. Ellie-May's podcast team P36 with 4 points, but then you had to take the biscuit. JV Racing P37 with minus 12 points.
get in there.
Which meant that-
Absolutely fantastic.
Which meant that overall, Wolfgang Steiner's leading with 4,560 points. Take a stroll in P2 with 4,506 points. What's the Racing Point in P3 with 4,498 points. On the Cubs P11, JB Racing, thanks to getting negative points in P13 with JB Racing there. Yeah, having Carlos Sainz on double points, Haas, an inactive K-Mag, and Albon probably didn't help you too much
The
there.
worst part is I genuinely thought about using like the last minute change, like token trick thing. But I was too
That could
busy
have
across
done
the
you so
weekend
much
to
good.
actually have done it. And I was like, this is the one weekend where I should have used that, but didn't. Oh well,
Yeah,
lost out there.
no. Ellie-May's podcasting, the highest one for her was P22, a bit rough, and then the greatest of stars, consistently still P37.
Well done, Dan. But that neatly, somewhere close to an hour by my watch, brings us to the end of this week's podcast. And it'll be our final one for a little bit. We've got a little bit of a hiatus until we head to Las Vegas just to recover, rest, breathe, just detox entirely from the chaos that was Sao Paulo. In the meantime, Thiemo, are you going to be doing anything? Where can the people find you? Or are you just going to sort of simply lie down in a darkened room?
I did that last night after the Grand Prix finish. I do need to lie down dark room after that and go, oh my days. I'm just going to re-promote the Rebecca Lucy article that I have at the moment over on Is It Fast, as that is well worth checking out, her story so far. And yeah, everything else for me you can find via my Instagram page, which will have a link in the description of this episode, wherever you're watching and listening to this.
Excellent. And in the meantime, if you want more from me, of course, all the usual social media feeds at Jesse on Cars for Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. There will be pictures coming out from this weekend's London to Brighton veteran car run, all pre-1905 cars trekking from the capital to the coast. Loads of fantastic photographs. Did bump into Ross Brawn over the weekend. He seemed to be having a better time than Sergio Perez, despite the fact that his car was well over 120 years old. And of course, if you want even more from me, I will be at the NEC this weekend coming, doing live stage bits, live podcasting, and just general sort of classic car related goodness at the Classic Motor Show. So plenty more to come from me still. Otherwise, we'll be back in due course with a preview for the Las Vegas Grand Prix. Not a clue how that's going to go. We'll figure that out when we get to the preview. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you again soon.